Get ready for a powerful conversation about setting yourself free with one of the greatest influencers in our lives and in the life of this podcast. That's coming up next.
Hi, and welcome to the Living Richly podcast. It's so great to have you here with us again today. We are super excited because we've got Dr. Sherry Cain here with us again this week.
2 weeks in a row. How did we manage to luck out and get Sherry for 2 weeks in a row?
If you haven't had a chance to listen to last week's episode, I encourage you to maybe even hit pause, go back, listen to that one, and then come back and jump in here. Dr. Sherry Cain has been such an influence on the Living Richly model in our own lives personally. She has really been such an instrumental part of our journey to healing, and it's just such a privilege to have her. She's worked with everything from prisoners to professional athletes to regular people like you and me. Now, you were on the show.
I've never been called regular before.
Sherry, you were on the...
I've been called special a lot.
Oh, yeah, you're very special. Sherry, you were on last week, and we have been flooded with emails and questions about that episode. And the number one, by far, the most common question that everyone has emailed us about since last week's episode dropped is this: who is more fucked up, Eric or Rob?
Well, let me get back to you on this. I'm not sure that I really want to open with offending either one of you.
That's probably wise. You could save that when we sign off later. You could let us know, and then we could let our listeners know.
Okay. All right.
Although we know it's Eric.
We know it's me. We know it's me. Made a lot of progress, though.
Did you see how he just took that? He accepted it, embraced it. Sherry's making a note for your next.
Yeah, I was mentioning.
Right, Eric. I'm making notes right now of what we need to.
No, Sherry, it is great to have you with us. And today we really want to talk about, because some of the I don't know if you call it the modalities or the areas that you specialize in are those areas that absolutely impact us. In fact, what I've done is I've pulled up on my iPad screen here is the team notes that you have had with our team at Rhapsody, our business company. Some of the notes you've done as you spend an entire year working with our entire team of coaches. And I pulled those notes up because I've got a bunch of things that are highlighted that I may use as kind of to help lead into different conversations with you. But maybe you could start by just giving us a little bit of what is the model that Dr. Sherry Cain typically leans into with the people that you work with?
Okay. I'm trained as a cognitive behavioral therapist. So, when I just did a training the other day, and I said, I'm teaching you the absolute best thing I've ever learned in my life. Like the thing that has absolutely changed my life, and the thing that I've seen probably thousands of people use to change their lives. And it's the cognitive behavioral therapy models that I use. So when people come into therapy, I am there. It's the foundation. I'm always thinking from these perspectives. And then eventually, depending on the pacing with the client, I always teach my clients these two models so that they begin to become their own therapists as well. You see me once a week or once every other week, but you've got the tools to be out there and challenging and working with yourself in the same way once you learn these models. So I'll give you the names of the two of them. It's Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy and Transactional Analysis are the two models that are the foundation of counseling. Now, early on as a therapist, those were the two models that I used. And it's it's been interesting in my development over 35 years as a therapist. The people who I sit with now certainly get a different therapist than the therapist I was 35 years ago. Because in addition to the cognitive therapy, there are many types of therapy for people who are considering going to therapy. We could write a whole list: existential therapy, Rogerian therapy, Adlerian therapy. The list goes on. Reality therapy, and what I believe as a therapist, the primary agent of change in therapy is first and foremost not the modality, but it's the therapeutic relationship. So, people can sometimes be worried, like, oh, what if I'm not getting the right kind of therapy? Or what if I didn't go to a cognitive therapist? Or what if I didn't go? First of all, it's the primary agent of change is find somebody that's a good fit for you, that you connect with and that you feel safe with and that you can tell your truths to. And then second is, I certainly am believe that cognitive behavior therapy is the biggest tool for change.
Yeah. And I'd have to, before meeting you, I've talked about it in the episodes where I tell my story, and in other episodes, I began to reach out for help probably around the age of 30, because I knew something was terribly wrong. The model I'd been taught in terms of how you live life, the expectations, and you got to do this and you live your life this way, and even my religious context that I came from, it just, none of it was working. And I remember I was very unhappy, and I remember reaching out for therapy, and I went a few times to different therapists and found some benefit to it. I also understand that back then, the walls were thicker, I hadn't perhaps I wasn't fully ready yet. But what I can say is, in my work with you and our work together, it's amazing the results that come, and they come quickly. They don't come overnight, but the modalities that you taught us, CBT, REBT, TA, you've mentioned them, and we're going to ask you to kind of give us a sort of a layman's version, short explanation of each and why they're so important. Those models now become foundational. And when you say they're designed to teach the client how to actually use these tools for themselves, I mean 100%. It really becomes a framework at which you look through the world at and are able to navigate out of difficult things that used to leave me marooned somewhere, right? Ship crashed on a rock or something, and now you're able to navigate much tougher stuff because you've got those tools under your belt, right?
Yeah.
So maybe do that exactly what Eric was suggesting. Why don't you give us layman's term, what do we mean by some of these different types of therapy?
Okay. So rational emotive behavior therapy is a cognitive therapy that, out of any of them, this is the line that when you get this, because when you hear it, it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But when you really get it, learn it, dig down, go after it, fight for it, and live it, this changes your life. So the rational emotive behavior therapy is based on the model that our thoughts cause our feelings, which cause our behaviors. So thoughts cause feelings, cause behaviors, because the beauty and wonderfulness of that is that when I realize every feeling I have, so every feeling, everybody out there listening, every feeling you have, you created it. And when you realize you created that feeling, the power in that you can then change that feeling. So I am directly responsible for how I feel and how bad I feel. And I'm not saying that, you didn't have something bad happen that there's a bad feeling, but I am certainly, I'll give you a quick, if you have 100 people that go through a divorce, not all 100 people feel the exact same way getting divorced, right? Some are devastated. Some are neutral because they've been beat up by the marriage so much that it's just sort of, okay, it's finally over. Some are having ordering divorce party stuff off of Amazon. So it's never the event. So it's not the event that causes us to feel, it's our self-talk. So going after self-talk is the basis of cognitive therapy, rational motive behavior therapy.
If I can jump in, just because I'm going to show you how great a student I am.
Oh, are you trying to get a gold star?
I am. Like, very difficult for the camera will be. It's probably not going to pick this up, other than the fact that there's a lot of color showing on the screen right now. But these are the words from your teaching with our team, the way I wrote it down, and it's probably very similar to what you just said on this subject. And I share this, by the way, this clip I give to clients. I at least once a month, there's a client I'm having or a team that I'm training that I bring this up and I pull it right out. I give you, I say, this is what I learned from Sherry. The words you use impact the way you think. What you think impacts how you feel. How you feel impacts how you behave, and how you behave impacts your results.
Absolutely.
And it's right out of that idea, right? It's such a powerful truth.
And I still remember when you made that statement, it was in one of those team sessions.
Yeah.
And I have to say that not only have you helped both Rob and I personally in terms of our own journey. Again, last week we mentioned on the show when you were with us for the first episode with you that in many ways this podcast has grown out of our personal journey, of which you have been a huge part, and you helped us overcome a bunch of things and find healing through those models. But those models also make us better coaches, right? I feel I'm a better coach now having these tools in my toolbox. But I still remember when you said to us, every feeling you've ever had, you created. And I remember at first internally my back went up. I sensed resistance. I was like, I don't know if I believe that. But then as I sat with it, I'm like, I said it just like, I don't know if I believe that.
That's his attempt at southern drawl.
That was my, well, it's because I often describe Sherry. I said, one of the things about Sherry is like, she can say anything to you, even if it hurts, because she says it with this, this southern drawl.
And a smile.
And a smile. She get away with anything. That's a really bad attempt at your, but it's so true.
It was pretty good.
It was pretty good. You like that?
You've been around me a while.
I've been around you a while, yeah. But this notion of we are not our feelings, we are not our thoughts. We have the power to choose our thoughts, choose our beliefs, and as a result, choose a better response to what we're facing. It's Dalai Lama's famous saying, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional, right? So powerful.
Yeah. The other thing about cognitive therapy that I just say quickly, because I want people to get it, I want them to get it, that there is a way to change. This is a vehicle to change. Language is so powerful. Every single word you utter has a consequence. There is a biological and a physiological consequence to a word. So your body gets flooded with things with I have a handout that I give people and I say, if I hand you this and all you do is take this handout and you don't even have to know why, but if you did what I said, which is don't ever say these words again, you will live longer and you will be a bit healthier if you eliminate these 5 words from your language. So it's a picture of a hand and it has the words can't, should, try, never, and always. That if we eliminate those words, and Albert Ellis, who's the founder of Rational Motive Therapy, he's the one that has said, should. Don't should all over yourselves and don't should all over other people. Right. Well, the shoulds are demands that we have for people. So there's a lot to learn that, because people can feel so hopeless and they can feel so terrible and they're not able to imagine being able to change. And that is that's what I always ask because I teach beginning counseling classes. I teach a lot of beginning counselors. And my question is, what do you believe about how people change? What do you believe about how people change? And you want your therapist to have an answer to that. I mean, I've sat in a room teaching 100 seasoned therapists and said, what do you believe about how people change? And, it's sort of like neurosurgery. My son has a brain tumor. And when we were consulting with the neurosurgeon, you don't want your neurosurgeon going, oh, well, I don't really know how I'm going to get it out, or maybe this way, or perhaps this. You want them to have some confidence in what they're doing, and so this, the having a model for how people change. And I mean, there are studies on the power of language and words. So I have to be quiet now because I could talk about it all amped up. I get all excited because it's so powerful.
But I think that's what makes you such an amazing practitioner of your craft, is because of, the conviction you have around its ability to help people. And we're both a testimony to that in terms of things that have I often talk, and I've said this to you, Sherry, in some of our sessions, that I still remember old Eric. I still remember that guy that couldn't stand himself and felt that he was the worst person on the planet and a failure as a dad and a failure as a partner and failure on all these fronts. And yet here I am holding up hope to the rest of the world, but I didn't believe it applied to me. I still remember him, but it feels like so long ago now. And like you said in the last episode, where you reached a point where you're comfortable in your own skin. That's where I've been tasting that now since probably spring of 2021. And so although I can still remember old me, it feels like so long ago, right? Talk to us for a minute. There's this notion of, does language impact your thoughts? Do thoughts impact your language? Like, where do you start, right? Because I think there's a case that could be made on both, that the language you use influences our thinking, but there's an old Hebrew proverb that says, out of the heart the mouth speaks. So our language also reveals what we believe about the world. How do those two things come together?
Yeah. In terms of language, sort of, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, right? Like, where does it come from? I think that people, when we speak, we do speak from the heart, from the heart, right? You feel like it's your heart. You feel like, oh, I have a feeling, I have an emotion, and then I'm going to be thinking about that emotion. But it really is, if you buy into cognitive therapy, it is the thought first that creates that feeling. It's the language that creates that feeling. I don't know if I'm answering or getting at what you're asking about that.
I think you are. I think it's because I've had people sometimes push back and just ask me that question to say, well, where does it start? But I think, to your point, sometimes it's hard to know where it starts, but those two things go together. If you want to change your feeling state, I often use, and I'm not sure if this is a good example, but I'll say, tell me, if I was to ask you to tell me your happiest memory, talk to me about your happiest memory, tell me the story. So I can almost guarantee what would happen. Your face would probably loosen. You'd start to smile. Because you would be remembering the feelings associated with that memory. And if I said, now talk to me about one of the hardest moments you've ever gone through, again, your entire physiology would change. What your thoughts, what you're thinking and focusing on, is literally impacting how you're feeling in that moment. And as a result, can definitely impact the decisions and the choices that you make.
Right, exactly. And yeah, I've had people, and doing trainings with therapists, or maybe somebody that really doesn't buy into cognitive behavioral therapy, they might come back with, well, no, that you just feel something, or I just woke up and I wasn't thinking about anything. Well, it's not that you were not thinking about anything. You were just not aware of what you were thinking about, because we're thinking all the time. Like, we're thinking, our mind, our subconscious is thinking while we're sleeping. Our dreams are our body processing stuff while we're asleep. And researchers, I don't know exactly how they know this, but they write it somewhere. So they must feel like they have an idea about it. But they say that we think between 60, 72,000 thoughts a day. And they also say that of those 60 to 72,000 thoughts a day, that 95% of them are unconscious. That we're only aware of 5% of the 70,000 thoughts that run through our mind today. So what are those unconscious boogers in there doing? What are they thinking? If you're walking around feeling pretty miserable, that's what therapy and awareness does. It's bringing the unconscious to the conscious. It's bringing what's in the darkness into the light so we can look at it and then begin to change it. So, the power, I often tell counselors, you can open people up or shut them down with a single sound. So what do you imagine words do that open somebody up or shut them down?
Well, you talk about those 60 to 72,000 thoughts a day and how 95% of them are in the subconscious mind. It's not in our awareness. I've also heard, reports of the percentage of those thoughts being negative is upwards of 85 to 90%. So of the 60 to 72,000 thoughts we have in a day, most of them are negative, and most of them are the same thoughts as yesterday. So you talk about being stuck in your past. I often, when people, you start talking about this subject, it can make them uncomfortable. We start talking about seeing a therapist or doing the work. And I've often heard it like, I'm afraid to do that, or I don't want to do that. I don't want to open up Pandora's box. But the reality is those shadow forces are pulling strings in our behavior, in our thinking, in our feeling. So the cost of doing the work versus the cost of not doing the work is pretty significant.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I had a client the other day that didn't want to do the work of past pretty intense abuse. And as if by not doing the work, somehow that she was going to avoid hurting. The reality is you're here because you're hurting. You're hurting so profoundly. So it's hurting you right now. And I assure anyone out there, opening Pandora's box and doing the work is a good thing.
It's interesting. Again, right out of my notes, right at the front here was that question that you mentioned just a few minutes ago about tell me how you believe people change, and then highlighted here was that response of people change by changing how they think. Another thing that you helped me do, and I'm sure Eric, you were in this as well as so many, is you also helped us understand the importance of naming what's going on, right? Naming the feeling, naming the emotion, that we can start to work through what's going on when we finally when we identify often the power of just simply naming something.
Name it to tame it, right?
Naming it to tame it, just naming this is the feeling I have. Okay, now I can, it's out there. It's no longer in here. It's out there. Talk a little bit about how you integrate that part of the practice of naming things in order to be able to work on them.
Well, yeah, the three big questions, like when I'm teaching people REBT, the three questions are, what am I feeling first? And then the importance of that is accurately labeling the feeling. Because if somebody just says, I'm really angry, and I go to work on anger, and we're working on anger, but I never help you drop down to what else are you feeling and what else are you feeling? And really, you're not really angry. You're sad, hurt, or scared. Anger is a protective emotion. So if we go work on anger, we're not really working on fear or hurt or sad at that moment. So the importance of accurately labeling feelings. So what am I feeling? What am I telling myself? And then is what I'm telling myself a scientific fact?
Oh, I remember you first saying it.
Well, I want to ask yourself that question, because if it's not a scientific fact, are you comfortable to every day say, okay, good night, I've lied to myself all day. See you tomorrow. let's lie again all day to ourselves tomorrow.
Right.
If you can't prove everything you're running through your head, I had a kiddo the other day when I said, I asked her how she felt about herself, and she said, I feel like I'm a piece of shit, is what she said. And so I'm like, okay, let's look for the evidence. Let's get some scientific evidence of that. And I was 100% certain we were not going to prove her fecal matter. So I knew I had stuff to go after.
Right. I've used, again, my version of that, again, inspired by our work together, because that was such a powerful process. I remember it took time, but over time, you helping me dismantle a lot of the irrational beliefs that I had formed about life in general, and primarily the beliefs I held about myself. Sherry, I still remember that time, and I've talked about it in the podcast before. It was in 2017, I'd hit the wall with severe burnout, and I ended up coming down to Pennsylvania to spend a week working with you in some intensive sessions. And I had been pretty much shitting on myself for most of those sessions, just really beating myself up. And then I remember we took a break for lunch, and that day, some days we went for lunch together, other days we parted ways and came back together in the afternoon. This was one of those days where we went our own way. And when I come back into the room we were using, beside me now is this chair, this little plastic toy chair that you've placed there. And I dared not ask you what it was doing there. I was like, fuck, I am not asking her what that's about, because I know I'm not going to like it. Well, sure enough, you didn't say anything. We started talking again, and I went right back to saying all those really derogatory things and hurtful things about myself. And I remember you, and one of the first, I think it's the first time I saw you get this firm with me, firm and still compassionate. You said, okay, get up. And I said, what? Stand up, you said. And this is the way that I remember it. And you said, and look at that chair. And you said, I want you to imagine your son, like if he was like 4 or 5 years old, sitting in that chair. Would you say to him the things that you're saying to yourself right now? And I remember that hit me like a ton of bricks. And that was a significant moment as part of an ongoing journey, but a significant moment in beginning to shift that mindset for me and begin to. I think these things don't just go away overnight. I think sometimes we start to loosen them, and then they start to slowly lose their power over us until we reach a point where they don't hold that much power at all. But I still remember that moment.
Right. Yeah. And Eric, when you said about a minute ago, you said about irrational sentences. That's so important. And that goes back to about when I said 95% of what we think is unconscious, what we think is subconscious or unconscious, we're not aware of those irrational thoughts. I tell people, and I'm very confident in telling people, if I took a room of 20 people had put 20 people off the street in a room, if I spent 20 minutes with you, I bet I can find an irrational sentence that you don't know you're thinking. Right. Like, I bet you think, we tend to think what we're thinking is rational until someone helps us.
Yeah. Well, you refer to it. I mean, and the first time I heard it put this way was from when you were working with our team recently, when you said that that's a person's private logic. They have their own private logic about how the world works or how the world should work. And when it doesn't show up that way, this is where we get really unhappy. And Albert Ellis, he says we make ourselves miserable. We make ourselves miserable because these false statements. I loved Ben Bergeron was on our show recently. He's talking about how, as human beings, we are master storytellers. Like we're storytellers. He said, but one of the things storytellers do is create drama. And I thought that was so powerful. Yeah. We create unnecessary drama because of the stories that we're telling ourselves. So you talked about you want people to get present to what they're feeling. And I know that you introduced the feeling wheel to us and what a powerful tool that is to try to kind of get beyond just the surface emotion and really understand what's going on. What are you thinking when you're feeling this way? What are the thoughts that are going through your head, right? How do you then, once you've done that work, you've identified how you're feeling, you've identified an irrational belief, especially as it has to do with your one's own self. How do you begin to unmake it and shape it differently? Where would you take a client next?
And this is REBT is an ABCDE model. And D is for disputing. You dispute the irrational sentences. And so that's where you go look for the fact in them. So if I have a guy who is in despair because someone has broken up with him, and that's the model I teach off of. I have a client who attempted to take his own life after a girlfriend broke up with him. And the sentences, I was listening with an REBT ear when I went to the hospital to see him. And he was saying things like, I can't live without her. No one else will ever love me. And so if you tell yourself those irrational sentences over and over, you begin feeling despair. So when he came back into therapy, we then go and take apart those sentences. We take apart the sentence, no one else will ever love me. Okay, is that a scientific fact? It's only a scientific fact if you've asked everyone out on the planet and they all said no.
Right.
It's only, I can't live without her. Well, it's only true if you, at birth, she was part of your bloodstream. You've lived without her for 25 years. You need air, food, and water, but it's breaking down the sentences to look for the fact. And the disputing of the sentences, challenging the irrational sentences over and over. Like if a man goes for a job and fails to get the job, he begins to do what Albert Ellis calls awfulizing or generalizing, which is also are irrational. Why is it awful you didn't get the job? Or somebody says, I can't stand it. People will say that a lot. I can't stand it. They'll say that about something they've been standing for 37 years. That is absolutely a lie. Yes, you can stand it. You've been standing it for 37 years. Let's change your language. Not that I can't stand it to I am no longer going to tolerate this. Right. That's a different sentence.
So
and that's
powerful.
more the truth. I want to work on changing this.
We've spent a lot of time. I love where this conversation. There's so much rich material and information that you're providing. Maybe give us the Coles notes or the summary of what transactional analysis, because that's another area that you spend a lot of time. We've certainly benefited from your what you've shared on that.
Yeah.
For the kind of just the layman who's maybe listening to this episode and never heard of transactional analysis, how would you introduce the topic?
Sure. These are the two things you want to know. These are like when someone taught us to brush our teeth, we would all do better if someone taught us transactional analysis and REBT together. These two go together hand in hand. I have a friend who works at a school system in Virginia. All the first graders are learning these, and it's amazing what's happening as they're learning these social emotional skills. But transactional analysis was developed by Eric Berne. There's lots of books on it. The I'm okay, you're okay. There's books on Eric used the term before, life script. Life script comes out of transactional analysis. But what this model is, it's just what it says. It helps you analyze transactions. It helps you analyze transactions within yourself. You know that phrase when you say, I said to myself, we say a lot of stuff to ourselves. So it's important to go in there and look at what we're saying to ourselves. It helps you then understand your interactions with other people. This is an absolute fabulous model for marriage counseling, family counseling. I teach it to all the companies that I work with. The sports programs, sports teams know it because, all of us, what it has to do with are the parts of our personality. See, all of you've probably had that experience where you are having a conversation and you think it's going to go one way, and then all of a sudden, like crap hits the fan, and you're like, what just happened? Well, what just happened is the term in transactional analysis, I sort of say parts of the personality. TA calls it ego states. So Eric has 5 ego states. Rob has 5. I have 5. Each listener, you have 5 parts of your personality that you could be in at any given time. And that's the just briefly, parent, adult, child. We have a parent part of us that we got from growing up. We have a child part of us that, again, came from our childhood, carries a lot of the baggage and garbage from our childhood. And then the adult rational part. The reason these two theories go so well together is because once people, like if I teach you these parts of your personality, and then it's really It's really cool because you start to recognize them in your partner or your mother or your sister, and it helps you gain perspective because you're like, okay, I'm expecting to go deal with my rational mother right now, but I can clearly see she's in her not okay child, or she's in her critical parent ego state. It gives you some perspective to begin to learn what these ego states are. And then once people get that, it's like, oh, okay, Sherry, I got it. I got what these ego states are. The ideal is to stay in my adult, because here's a phrase that's people in their adult ego states never fight. You don't have fights. People in their ego states don't have drama. You can disagree, like adults disagree and adults handle conflict, but they don't have these dramatic knockdown, drag out, storm out the door, scream at each other like the house is on fire. It's so REBT. When people get it, then they say, how do I stay in my adult? You stay in your adult through your self-talk. There's certain language and self-talk that'll put you right in your critical state or your not okay state. So it's really, I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but these are, if you have any way you don't like feeling, it is worth it to learn these two therapies. If I only had to have people learn two things, it would be these two things.
Well, so, and I one of the things that, of course, this model was a model that you taught us and used in our work together. And I still remind myself regularly, especially if I'm heading into a tough conversation or I've just been in a tough conversation, and I say to myself, adult forward, adult forward. I remember you teaching me that, right? Adult forward, which is the most rational, mature part of us, want to bring that forward. But talk to us, perhaps. So that's the goal ultimately, is to spend more time in rational adults and less time in those unhealthy.
Two parents, two children.
Two parents, two children. So talk to us about those states.
What are the two parents? What are the two children?
Okay, yeah, because 5 ego states. Parents broken down into critical parent and nurturing parent. The child's broken down into not okay child and okay child. The ideal profile, we want to have a big nurturing parent part of us. That's the part that does nice things for yourself. It does nice things for your others. You want to have a big free child. You want to have that fun part. A lot of people grow up and then they stay really stoic. They become stoic and they don't have that fun, silly, playful part. And then you want to have a big adult, rational adult ego state. The two words that describe the adult are rational, the rational part, and the thinking part. So we want to eliminate, we carry critical parent stuff and not okay child stuff. All of the addictions, all of the shopping addiction, gambling, porn, drugs, alcohol, all that stuff comes out of the not okay child. And all of that stuff is just about trying to plug up the holes in our cup. When we don't feel okay, we try to fill the void with many things. So that is the work of therapy, is to develop that profile, get rid of the not okay child and the critical parent ego state, and help people grow the nurturing parts, the rational part, and the free child, fun-loving part.
Can you give us some examples of what someone, if they're in their critical parent, if that's where they're kind of coming at life from, what does that look and sound like? And what does not okay child, if we're in that ego state, again, if those are the states we're trying to spend less time in and move over to more healthy state, what are some of the things we look for that would tell us we're in critical parent or not okay child?
Critical parent, the critical part is it's the judgy part, like judgment of self, judgment of others. It's rigid, it's inflexible. It has a lot of shoulds and musts and demands and have tos. And the not okay child part is, as I said, all those things that we attempt to use to escape from pain. The not okay child has fits. It has temper tantrums, just like not okay. Just when our children are not okay and having temper tantrums. So the thing to recognize is when emotions are out of control, when we are not performing at our best self, you are likely in one of those two ego states. Right. The adult ego state is pretty rational and doesn't get knocked off kilter. Even in the face of, like, the adult ego state, handles hard things. They have really hard things happen, but you're able to handle them without deteriorating, without getting broken by them.
Right. I think it's Albert Ellis who talks about, who is the founder of REBT, that you've been talking about already on the show here, who talked about that one of the issues is that our tolerance for frustration is too low. Right? So it doesn't take much to knock us off kilter. And I can't remember if it was Ellis who also said the following, or if I heard this somewhere else, but our frustration tolerance is too low and our emotional reactivity is too high. So imagine if we have a low frustration tolerance and it doesn't take much to set me off emotionally. That is a recipe for disaster, unhappiness, misery, because, again, we are never victims. We are choosing our response, but we have programmed ourselves to respond in such a way that it doesn't take much to knock us off kilter. The goal ultimately is, I think, trying to increase our tolerance for when life doesn't show up the way we want. So greater frustration tolerance while we're dialing down the emotional reactivity. And perfection's not the goal. I know I'm certainly not Jesus or Gandhi, but I know that work, it really does take a lot now to knock me, and stuff that would sidetrack me or knock me off center for sometimes days, even weeks at times. Now I'm finding the reset is usually within a day or two, or sometimes within an hour. I'm able to look at it. I'm able to run what just happened through these filters, these lenses that you describe, right, that you've taught us, and you're able to find your way out of stuff that before you would either just try to bury, hide from, run from, self-medicate against. That you're actually being able to find your way forward. So the tools really work.
Absolutely brilliant, I think, for sure. Go ahead, Sherry.
I was just going to say, because, those are just two theories that we talked about. That's why counseling is just something so great to get into, because there's so many more. Like, Eric, you mentioned the term private logic. That comes from Adlerian theory. Alfred Adler studied human behavior, and one of his phrases that's really important is all behavior is purposeful. And so going after figuring out what the purpose of our behavior is, sometimes you know it and sometimes you don't know it. But again, a reason to go after exploration of this stuff. Another, Carl Jung, is Jungian therapy is a big, rich source of therapy. And Carl Jung said that emotional maturity is when we are able to tolerate things not being as we would have them be.
Right. I love that. It's. I remember Jim years ago. He was kind of the first person after I had tried a couple of counselors and it just didn't work out. I was in a bad place. This is when my marriage was falling apart, and I went and spent some time with him in Houston. And I remember him saying to me, I was describing some of what I was feeling and experiencing, and he says, Eric, it's okay. You just haven't developed the emotional maturity yet. And he, again, was very compassionate how he said it. But man, did my back ever go up. Like inside, I'm like, what are you calling me, immature? And just that response alone is like, well, that doesn't sound very mature. But I think, and I don't, from the reading I've done, our work together, when folks don't do the work, right? When we try to hide from our pain, run from our pain, medicate against our pain, when we try to numb our pain, when we find ourselves in frustrating situations or in conflict of any kind, we revert back. We move from being a 52-year-old grown-ass man, and I can easily go back to what I was like at 8 years old. So if I'm not getting what I want, I'll pout or I'll yell or right? Like all these immature ways of reacting, we think we're okay, but these are symptoms that there's some work here to be done and that one could find a lot more joy in life if we weren't plagued by these issues. We're about to wrap up the show, Sherry, because we know you've got a time limit coming up on you very, very soon. Quickly here before we sum up. Someone is hearing this, they're listening, it's piquing their curiosity. What are 2 or 3 things that someone who's considering going to seek out some help, which is one of the most courageous things a human being can do, what should they look for in a therapist?
Absolutely. And look for a therapist the same way you look for any healthcare provider, right? So you may get a first opinion, a second opinion, a third opinion, right? So interview them. If a therapist is offended, if you call and ask them, tell me your philosophy, tell me what types of therapy you practice, tell me if they in any way you get any sort of flack about that, you probably want to move on to the next therapist, because the therapist should be excited to tell you about what kind of therapy they do and what the work would be like with them. So interview them. And then I always tell people, give it 3-4 times with somebody, because that first time or two is the intake. You might be nervous but if after a few sessions, you're not really feeling a click, like you're not really feeling like you could bare your soul with this person, that you feel safe with them, because what scares me or worries me is that somebody gets a bad experience with the therapist and then never goes back to it. They're just like anything. There's therapists that aren't very good. There's doctors that are, lawyers that aren't very, whatever profession. So shop around, find somebody you can click with. I certainly am of the belief that finding someone who knows and practices cognitive behavioral therapy is, what I believe. Now, I'm not saying that the other therapies, you won't have change with those, because certainly you will if you have a good therapeutic relationship. I just believe that cognitive therapy speeds up the process, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I would echo that. I think I said that at the top of the show, that I had tried different methodologies, and although it felt like some progress, the progress with you was like light years ahead. It just seemed to really get at the issues quickly and begin to teach us skills to respond differently.
Let me ask you.
I was just going to say, I remember it was one of my first classes in my master's program, and it was with my mentor, Ed, and I've told him this because he's in therapy, and he's selling us on therapy, and he's like, he said, I've had people come to me in the first session, and after the first session, they walk away going, I got more out of this first session with you than I got in 5 years of therapy with my other person. And I just remember thinking, oh, well, he thinks very highly of himself. Like, it's sort of like, okay. And it wasn't until years later when I had people say exactly the same things to me, because sometimes you've spent years processing emotion, but somebody didn't have the tool to tell you what to do about it, what to do with it.
Right. So good.
Well, you have done that for us.
Yeah.
And absolutely. And the influence, again, that you have had in our lives individually, even in our lives together as we've run our business, the impact that you've had at Rhapsody, as well as with the Living Richly model, is so just so much. We appreciate you. Continue to. We really have to have you back on, because there's so much that we could cover in these topics together. But thank you so much for spending some time with us today, Sherry.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. Thanks.
I want to just thank you, listeners, who have been tuned in into this episode. Hope that you've received kind of some real good insight. Maybe it's beginning a journey for you to explore some of these therapies, and it might be time for you to reach out to someone. I want to encourage you to take a moment and subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss any more of these episodes coming up. Like, share. If there's someone that you're thinking about that maybe would just really appreciate today's content, maybe even tag them and let them know about the episode and invite them to watch it as well.
Yeah, again, we'll also invite you to go to our website, livingrichly.me. We're going to be putting a ton of stuff in the show notes, links where you can learn more about all of the models that we discussed today, links where you can get a hold of Dr. Sherry if you want to find her online. This has been such a rich conversation. This is us truly paying forward to you, our audience, the work and the benefit we've received from this process. Our goal with this movement is to help people live their best life. Hard to do that when you're carrying a ton of baggage. And when you can start to get free from that stuff, life becomes amazing. So thanks again for tuning in. We hope to see you next week. And until then, get out there and live your best life.